A quick note before we get started. This episode contains cursing. Please take note if you're listening with young Sox fans.
Talk to anyone who's been, and they'll tell you, Fenway Park isn't just any stadium. This is a special place, a field of dreams.
It's like the Wizard of Oz, going from black and white to color. It's a magical place. There's just a feeling that great things have happened here, and you can just feel the history.
If it's fair, it's gone.
Fenway was built over 100 years ago. All of the greats played here. Ted Williams, Willie Mays, the Great Bambino, Babe Ruth.
First home run of the series.
And the ballpark's red bricks, the old wooden seats in the grandstand, the dirt on the mound, they all hold memories.
Home run!
Emotions, too.
It just gives off a vibe of beauty and greatness and tremendous tragedy.
Stan Grossfeld is a photographer for the Boston Globe. He joined the paper in the early 80s, and over the years, he was right there, covering the Red Sox and their many disappointments. The most heartbreaking scene Stan saw was in the early hours of October 17th, 2004, the aftermath of Game 3 of the American League Championship Series. Here's the image. Boston Red Sox fans are trudging out of Fenway Park. They'd just seen their team lose horribly at their home stadium to hated rivals, the New York Yankees.
2 more runs.
And now it is 19-8.
Boston has written another chapter into their tortured history.
You really think somebody died. This death stares. It's just misery.
Stan clicked and snapped, immortalized these haunted faces.
In Photoland, you start looking for dejected faces, and it's pretty easy to find. The scene is morgue-like.
This pain, this misery, it was familiar to Sox fans. They'd been here before, many times. Come close, but been denied. Snatched defeat from the jaws of victory.
A 3-run home run for Bucky Dent. The Yankees
Found new and humiliating ways to lose.
Behind the bag. It gets through Bucky.
It happened so many times that Sox fans started to think that there was no earthly explanation for all of this bad luck.
Boone has hit a home run. The Yankees go to the World Series.
Many believed that the team was cursed, that a hex hung over Fenway Park and the Sox would never win another World Series because of it. They called it the Curse of the Bambino. Over the years, so many Sox teams tried and failed to throw off the curse. All-stars, MVPs, Hall of Famers. For decades, great ball players shipped up to Boston to try to win a World Series and remove the jinx on Fenway Park. But they all failed. By the 2004 season, it had been 86 years since the Sox had won a World Series. This is the story of how that curse was finally broken. It's the story of a team that everyone counted out, a group of underdogs who stuck together no matter what. The 2004 Red Sox, otherwise known as the Idiots.
We had fun and we laughed and we made fun of each other and we loved on each other.
It was a family, and you don't get that too often.
Here we are, just a bunch of idiots and just dudes.
It was a team that was more than the sum of its parts.
And I felt that we weren't the best players, we were the best team.
A team that was not afraid to break the rules.
He started pouring us shots of Jack Daniels.
These guys look like the Grateful Dead. They did.
A team that was so very Boston.
They put this town on their back. They really did.
04 Sox were kind of the janitors that solved the equation of the curse, you know?
And their story, it transcends sports.
When I get asked what's the best story you've ever covered, it's always the 04 Red Sox. It's a biblical kind of sports story that's timeless. It changed everything, and there'll never be anything as good again.
From the Boston Globe, I'm Jasmine Aguilera, and this is The Curse Breakers. Part 1. Hearts Were Smashed. You can probably tell from my accent, I'm not from Boston. I grew up in Santa Cruz, California, and I used to go to San Francisco Giants games with my dad. This was around 2004, and I remember when the Red Sox would come to town because those were the games we sat in the bleachers for so we could heckle Manny Ramirez. He had a way of slinging his pants low that was unusual in baseball at the time. I bonded with my dad yelling, "What's the matter with Manny? He's a bum!" Classic heckling from the bleachers. He didn't seem to mind it, though. I moved to Boston a few months back, drove across the country from California, and as soon as I hit New England, I started to see the Red Sox flags, the ball caps with the red B on the front, and I could sense the history and the lore. I'd heard about the Curse of the Bambino before, but I never really understood it. Hello!
Must be Jasmine and Aaron.
Yes. Hi. So I went to see the man who wrote the book on it, literally.
Hello, I'm Dan Shaughnessy, a sports columnist for the Boston Globe, where I've been full-time since 1981, embarrassing as that sounds.
In 1990, Dan wrote a book about the Red Sox and their tortured history. It's called The Curse of the Bambino. But before he made a career out of writing about the Sox, Dan was a fan of the team.
I mean, I lived and died with the Red Sox when I was a little kid. I'd be crying if the Sox lost and stomping up the stairs.
That's not unusual in New England. All across the region, fandom is passed down like a family heirloom. And that's how it was for Dan, too. But this heirloom, it was kind of a poisoned chalice. Because when Dan was growing up in the 1960s, the Red Sox sucked.
They lost a lot. They were bad when I was a little kid.
But historically, that wasn't always the case. In fact, quite the opposite.
I mean, the Red Sox were started in 1901, and they were the dominant team of the early years of the American League. They won 5 of the first 15 World Series.
But just like Leonardo DiCaprio said in The Departed, families in America are always rising and falling. And so it goes with ball clubs, too. Because the sale of a Red Sox player in 1919 appears to have doomed the team to generations of failure. It all started back in 1914, when the Sox picked up a promising young rookie.
An orphan child from Baltimore named Babe Ruth. He's a pitcher, he's large, he's a party boy, and he also can hit home runs.
If it's fair, it's gone.
A lot of home runs.
Home run! There's a great comeback.
This young kid was already a star, and everyone could see that he was going to go on to be a legend. But the Red Sox owner back then, a guy named Harry Frazee, didn't care too much about the fortunes of the team. Harry had other things on his mind.
He was a Broadway producer in New York. He was not beholden to Boston, but he owned the team here. He did win a World Series with them, but he was concerned with his theater holdings and with New York more than Boston. One of his quotes was, "The best thing about Boston is the train to New York." So he was not particularly enamored with us or our culture here and how great we are, the hub of the universe that we are. So after the 1919 season, Harry Frazee sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees.
In exchange for Babe Ruth, Harry didn't get any new players. Instead, he got cash.
And the cash was used to keep his Broadway productions afloat.
Harry used some of the Babe Ruth money to finance a play called My Lady Friends. It was later adapted into the musical No, No, Nanette. I gotta be honest, before I worked on the story, I'd never heard of either of them. God, that's like trading Michael Jordan to make like a indie movie.
Thank you very much. Good analogy. I like that.
After Babe Ruth went to the Yankees, he cemented his legacy as the greatest baseball player of all time. And in the years that followed, the Bronx Bombers kept on winning championships. And Yankees fans, they would never let Sox fans forget it.
Eventually, the Yankee fans started yelling, 1918, 1918, every time they invaded Fenway Park, and even at Yankee Stadium. And we heard that chant for so long.
This is Cheryl Cosmo. Cheryl's a lifelong Red Sox fan, and she loves the Sox so much that when she retired, she took a part-time job as a tour guide at Fenway Park. You'll hear from Cheryl and other Red Sox fans throughout the story. So this Babe Ruth thing, it was more salt in the wound for Red Sox fans, because Boston and New York have always had beef. It goes all the way back to when the Dutch sailed into New York Harbor and the Puritans settled here in the 17th century. They didn't see eye to eye back then, and a couple hundred years later, baseball teams became the best way for the two cities to hate on each other, forever. Cheryl and some more Sox fans.
I hate the Yankees. I still do.
They were the evil empire. They kept winning, and we kept losing. They're our bigger brother city. We did not like each other.
There were literally shirts being sold outside of Fenway Park that said, "My two favorite teams are the Red Sox and whoever beats the Yankees."
The thing about Babe Ruth going to the Yankees that made it all so much worse was that the Sox didn't just lose their best player. The sales seemed to put a hex on their team. It was as if when Babe Ruth went south and left Boston, he took all the luck with him.
So I wrote a book about this dark history of the Red Sox. It was called The Curse of the Bambino. And these bad endings kept happening after the book came out.
Check out the Wikipedia entry for The Curse of the Bambino, and you'll find a long list under the section titled Reportedly Cursed Results. But if Sox fans had to narrow it down to the 3 all-time biggest heartbreaks, here's what most of them would say.
Heartbreak number 1, Bucky Dent, 1978.
I mean, 1978, a particularly painful year for Boston fans.
Here's the scenario. It's the late 70s. Jimmy Carter's in office, and disco is on the radio. That year, the Red Sox had a powerful team, and hopes were high that they could go all the way. Keep in mind, the team hadn't won a championship since 1918, so they'd already endured 60 years of fallow times. The 78 season boiled down to a crucial game against the Yankees. Always the Yankees.
Which one's going to go to the playoffs, and which one's going to go home and cry in their beer for the summer?
Do you really have to ask? In the 7th inning, the Red Sox were in the lead, and up stepped a Yankee shortstop named Bucky Dent. Bucky was a good player, but he wasn't known as a power hitter, so no one expected much.
Deep to left.
Then this happened.
Yastrzemski will not get it. It's a home run. A 3-run home run for Bucky Dent. The Yankees now lead.
Bucky's home run put the Yankees ahead, and they won the game. The Sox weren't going to the playoffs.
That's pain right there. And he became Bucky fucking Dent. That became his name.
Sox fans still remember it well.
I couldn't function. I'm telling you, it was awful.
Bucky fucking Dent, man. And little old ladies will say that in Boston.
It was really awful.
But the Sox weren't done in 78. No. They would keep finding new ways to lose, and there would be more pain.
Heartbreak number 2, Bill Buckner, 1986.
This one, they get to the World Series against the Mets?
It's the mid-'80s. Ronald Reagan is in office, and acid-wash jeans are all the rage. A different time, and a new Red Sox team. One that seems destined to win it all.
They win the first 2 in New York. I don't think any team ever won the first 2 on the road and then didn't win the World Series, but these guys pulled it off. So it rolled ahead to Game 6. The Sox lead 3 games to 2. We're in New York, Shea Stadium, and the Red Sox took a 5-3 lead in the top of the 10th inning, and now they're going to win the World Series in New York. First time in 68 years.
And we had the champagne, and we were ready, and because the Red Sox are going to win the World Series, they're going to win the World Series.
Or so everyone thought. But here's what actually happened. In extra innings of Game 6, the game was tied, and Red Sox player Bill Buckner took his position at first base. Bill wasn't a star, but he was solid, dependable. He had a good career. Bill Buckner seemed to be the kind of guy you could always count on. Then this. Mets batter Mookie Wilson hit a slow roller up the first baseline.
Little roller up along first.
It looks like an easy play, the kind of play even I could make. But the ball slips through Buckner's legs.
Behind the bag. It gets through Buckner. Here comes Knight.
The Mets players leap on top of one another and celebrate. And Bill Buckner stares off into the distance.
If one picture is worth 1,000 words, you have seen about 1,000,000 words.
But it became symbolic, and just used to be an old clip on Why World of Sports with the skier going off the ski jump and the agony of defeat, and that's what that play became. It was repeated millions of times.
Which was fuel for the fire, for the curse.
A couple of years after, maybe a year after, there was a joke that went around that Bill Buckner was so depressed after losing the World Series for the Red Sox that he went out and jumped in front of a bus, and it went right between his legs.
In the years that followed, there was more misfortune, and some years the Red Sox didn't even make the playoffs. They were just straight up bad. Things started to turn around in the early 2000s when John Henry bought the team. And I'll stop to acknowledge here that John Henry also owns the Boston Globe, the newspaper that I work for. With new investment and the acquisition of some strong players, the Sox were a contender again.
This team feels like the one that has the potential, the right mix, the us against the world attitude.
This is Chad Finn. Chad's a Globe columnist and a Red Sox fan, and he thought the team of 2003 had the right stuff.
To actually get over that huge burden of the curse and of 80-plus years without winning a World Series and all the crushing losses that had come in big games before in 67 and 75 and 78 and 86.
Chad's colleague Chris Casper felt the same. Chris is a sports columnist and host of Boston Globe Today's Sports, and he thought the 03 team was going to go all the way.
6 of the 9 guys in that lineup hit 25 home runs or more. And I think a lot of people felt like this is going to be the team. This is going to be the team that breaks through.
Which takes us to our final cursed game.
Heartbreak number 3, Aaron Boone, 2003.
Okay, so George W. Bush is now president. We have the internet, and hip-hop rules the airwaves. And baseball's in a new era, too. Moneyball statistics made the game smarter, and anabolic steroids made the players bigger, faster, and stronger. Yet again, the season came down to a crucial game against the Sox's most hated rivals, the New York Yankees. Those guys. It's the 11th inning of Game 7 in the American League Championship Series. The Sox were in the lead, and it looked like they were going to close the game out and make it to the World Series. The next Yankee player up to bat is a guy called Aaron Boone,
who was a marginal player, a good player, but nothing great, nothing you fear, not a home run guy.
Sox pitcher Tim Wakefield steps up. He throws Boone his signature knuckleball, and then...
There it goes, and the Yankees are going to the World Series! Aaron Boone has hit a home run!
The curse of the Bambino had struck again.
That was right there in the curse of the Bambino. That's when people started to think, this is never going to be right. We cannot do anything about this. Something always happens. And that was an event that was devastating.
And Red Sox fans were once more traumatized by their baseball team.
It was, again, dead silence in our house. Except, I was really angry that night. I'm not proud of this. You might want to cut this part out. I'm sitting in the basement with my kids. I took the clicker, the remote, and I threw it against the wall.
Hearts across New England were smashed.
It was devastating, and it made you think that, all right, maybe this is never going to happen with this team, because if this team can't win, who the hell is gonna?
So now you're thinking, okay, it's never going to happen.
You know, it wasn't just me that felt that way. I think it was a New England-wide thing at that point.
It was like a collective grief we all had.
It's like, yep, this is just the way it goes. This is just our lot in life.
I say to my son, okay, everything's okay. The Red Sox are now free to win the World Series because you have finally experienced what it's truly like to be a Red Sox fan.
After Aaron Boone's home run finally dropped to earth, it had been 85 long years since the Red Sox had won a World Series. And it was clear that if they were ever going to win, things had to change. Big time. That's coming up after the break. So go take your 7th inning stretch. We'll be right back.
Hey, it's Mike Bello, Deputy City Editor for the Boston Globe. If you're enjoying this episode so far, please subscribe to this feed where we will periodically drop new and exciting stories when we have them. Sit with us and experience the best of the Boston Globe in your ears. So send a text to someone you know who would enjoy the podcast so they will never miss a drop.
After Dent, Buckner, Boone, and all of the tragedy that Red Sox fans had endured, many believed that the team was doomed. That when Babe Ruth packed his bags and headed south to the Yankees, a cosmic curse loomed over the Sox. Over the years, Sox fans tried everything they could to break the curse. In 2001, one guy climbed to the summit of Mount Everest and left a Sox cap up there. He said a Tibetan holy man told him that making an offering to the gods would bring the ball club good fortune. Then, when he returned to base camp, just to really make sure, he burned a Yankees hat. But that didn't work, and the Sox kept losing.
We were cursed. That was just kind of like what the narrative was, and it was so powerful.
There are a lot of people, such as myself, who believe in all that magical shit.
I believed in the curse at that point.
But some people say that there are non-supernatural reasons for why the Sox went so long without winning a championship, and that there is no curse. Here's Chris Gasper.
I think in simple terms, what held the Red Sox back was probably ownership and management.
Remember Heartbreak number 2, the play where the ball dribbles through Bill Buckner's legs in 1986? Look a little closer, and those events seem less supernatural. Because a lot of people say that Bill Buckner shouldn't have been playing that late in the game. He was injured and probably should have been subbed out.
I think really you can make the argument that Buckner never should have been in that position. He never should have been in that game.
So maybe it wasn't the curse of the Bambino. It was management. Chris points to something else that held the Sox back.
The most obvious thing you look at is just the checkered racial history of the team, the fact they were the last team to integrate in Major League Baseball. There was this entire source of copious talent that the Red Sox voluntarily would not dip into to try and pursue winning a championship.
Back when Major League Baseball was founded, the sport was segregated. Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier when he suited up for the Brooklyn Dodgers in the spring of 1947. But the Boston Red Sox didn't field a black player until 1959, over a decade later. The Sox were the last team to integrate. And over the years, they missed out on some of the greatest players of all time. Willie Mays was turned away. This was a guy who a lot of people put right up there with Babe Ruth in baseball's pantheon. The story goes that the Sox had the chance to sign Mays, but then owner Tom Yaki, a guy who made his money from lumber and iron ore, said no. He didn't want a black guy wearing a Sox uniform, no matter how talented they were. But it wasn't just the ownership. It was the city, too.
You know, I think the Red Sox inability to recruit black players, particularly once free agency came into Major League Baseball, it became this sort of self-perpetuating prophecy because they had not shown an interest for so many years. It was seen that the franchise was hostile to black players, and also the city was hostile to black players.
Chris grew up in Lynn, a 30-minute ride north of Boston. And like so many kids from New England, he was a Sox fan. And he asked his dad to take him to Fenway to see the team. He says that back in the 80s, when he first started going to see the Sox, he'd look around the stadium and the 40,000 or so fans gathered there. And he wondered, am I the only black guy here?
You start to look around and realize that nobody really looks like you when you're sitting in the bleachers. And it's a little bit of a disquieting feeling. You sort of wonder why that's the case, and you sort of wonder, are you really, welcome here?
Over time, things started to shift at Fenway Park, and fans like Chris felt less alone.
I think you just had more people who weren't from Boston and had more of an open-minded attitude. I think the city overall became probably less parochial and more diverse as you had a more diverse crowd of college students coming here and some of them sticking around. I think that changed things. Attitudes obviously ended up changing as well.
By the early 2000s, the Sox roster, like the city, was much more diverse. And one black player they signed in the summer of 2004 would have a big impact on the ball club's history. His name was Dave Roberts.
They're waving Roberts home. Here comes the relay. He scored.
After Aaron Boone hit his walk-off home run and knocked the Sox out of the playoffs, The team knew they had to make changes. They wanted to start with a new manager, someone who could shoulder the weight of history and take the team forward. They turned to a classic old-school baseball man, a guy who played for years in the majors, played until his body gave out, and then turned to coaching.
My name is Terry Francona, former manager of the Boston Red Sox.
Terry did not care about the curse of the Bambino.
No, I've never been superstitious. I think I've always felt like, you got a certain amount of energy and you hate to waste it on something you can't control. I never even brought it up with our team, nor did I think I needed to. Our job was to stay in the moment, and that's hard enough to do.
As the team's manager, Terry would be responsible for choosing the starting lineups, the team's strategy, and coaching the players. By his side would be the Red Sox general manager. That's the person who handles contracts and builds the roster. So initially, the Red Sox wanted to hire Billy Beane, the guy who Brad Pitt plays in Moneyball. He's credited with being among the first to use statistical analysis to evaluate players, ending the days of scouts going off gut and instinct. But Billy turned down the Sox, so they went with a young Yale graduate named Theo Epstein. Theo had been at the Sox for a couple of years in more junior roles. When he got the general manager job, he was just 28 years old, so younger than some of the players on the roster. But what Theo lacked in experience, he made up for with his intelligence.
He was the smartest guy in the room, and he could multitask better than anybody I've ever seen. And when I say multitask, I don't mean two things, I mean like 10. And you better try to keep up. That's the best way I can put it.
Theo went to an Ivy League school and never played pro baseball. And he'd put together a baseball operations department full of guys who had a similar profile. Men who knew as much about stats and spreadsheets as they did about sliders and knuckleballs. Dan Shaughnessy.
It was all like-minded young nerds who had gone to like primo colleges. They're all from Yale and Amherst and Williams, and they're all like in their late 20s. They drink beer at night. They play ping pong. They play poker, and they talk about baseball.
Theo and his team were a new breed, but Terry kind of liked that.
They had energy and they were fun. They were all smart. It was a good group.
In the spring of 2004, Terry and Theo looked down the Red Sox roster and assessed what they needed. Last year's team had come close, but they'd fallen at the final hurdle. How could they change that?
In my opinion, it was just more pitching.
So they went out to try to pick up a couple pitchers, including Curt Schilling.
Swing and a miss, he struck him out. He chased the bad pitch.
Curt's a big, burly blonde guy from Anchorage, Alaska. He was born with a rocket for a right arm and nerves of steel.
Curt Schilling, the most valuable player in this year's National League.
Curt was a winner, exactly the kind of guy the Red Sox needed.
He was a good pitcher. He was fearless. He was clutch. And he kind of liked throwing off the curse and, being the alpha male in that fight. So he was well suited for that role.
After he signed, Curt made a car commercial. In it, he's hitchhiking to Fenway Park and hops into a Ford truck. The driver asks him, "Hey, where are you headed?" And Curt says,
"Boston, gotta break an 86-year-old curse."
Curt joined the Sox in time for spring training. Every year, the Sox escape cruel New England winters and jet down to Fort Myers, Florida to get ready for the new season. Now, a big ball club like the Red Sox, you might be imagining the team working out in a state-of-the-art training facility. But back in 2004, that was not the case.
It looked like a nuclear test site. It's not a pretty part of Florida. It was not the beautiful sandy beaches of Sarasota. This was like a dump. And people would hold their noses and go past these strange-looking pipes in the ground and alligators and this and that.
The Fallout Zone feel was actually a good fit for this new Red Sox team. They were unconventional and full of characters who weren't afraid to do things differently. Fly a drone over that spring training field and you'd see them all, stretching, getting loose, hitting balls high above the palm trees and out towards the Gulf of Mexico. There was Manny Ramirez, a long-haired Dominican-American outfielder.
Back it goes! Back goes Anthony!
And Manny was one of the greatest right-handed hitters of all time.
Manny was also a fun kind of guy.
Manny's zany antics are legendary. There are clubhouse tales of him spiking the team's booze with Viagra, and one time he caused a real stir because he went onto eBay to sell a used barbecue grill. On the listing, there were these surreal images of Manny, an all-star, posed next to his grill in an old t-shirt and gym shorts, just like a regular dude. Manny just being Manny. That's what people said to explain his shenanigans. But boy, could he play. And so could another veteran pitcher, Pedro Martinez.
Pedro's greatest years were 99 and 2000, but he was still really good in 2004.
One of the greatest pitchers the Red Sox ever had. He was a mean son of a gun on the mound sometimes. You didn't want to mess with Pedro.
Then there was David Ortiz, a.k.a. Big Papi, a 6'3" slugger.
This ball is gone!
David Ortiz was beginning to flex his muscles to be the great clutch hitter that he is.
In Big Papi's first few seasons in the majors, he struggled. So when he signed for the Red Sox, he had a point to prove.
But Ortiz emerged. He emerged as a hitter. He emerged as a personality, as a leader on the team.
There were others, too. Outfielder Johnny Damon.
Johnny Damon was at the height of his skill set.
Veteran pitcher and all-around good guy Tim Wakefield. The captain, Jason Varitek, a brawler who always looked out for the rest of the guys.
It was just a really good team.
But the 2004 Red Sox team had something else, too. Something that could take them from being good to being great. They forged it that spring down in Florida, at their training base that resembled a nuclear test site. Team chemistry.
There's a good feel to this team, and they had enough goofy guys, young guys, long hair guys, guys with guitars, sloppy guys, guys that didn't dress that well. And the manager, Francona, he was good with all this. He didn't have a strict rules about protocol. Kevin Millar, very loud, wild guy, comes in.
Here's Kevin Millar, the loud, wild guy, and the Red Sox first baseman.
We had a way when people walked in that clubhouse to check in your egos and your feelings. Then we had fun and we laughed and we made fun of each other and we loved on each other.
Outfielder Johnny Damon felt the love too.
We had a bunch of guys who just enjoyed life, probably more than we enjoyed baseball, so we played hard on the field and we all got together off the field and just enjoyed each other. I mean, it was a family, and you don't get that too often.
Here we are, just a bunch of idiots and just dudes. We had some superstars, but we had dudes. And I felt that we weren't the best players. We were the best team.
The guys bonded in the usual ways that ball players bond. They trained together, they ate together, and they drank together. But they also grew their hair out together. Johnny Damon started that when he showed up to spring training with long hair and a beard.
I walk into the meeting and Theo Epstein just has a big open-eyed stare at me and told me, you're not cutting this. Fuck the Yankees. We're the Red Sox.
Theo said that because Yankee players have to keep their hair short and neat. But the Sox were different.
We can do whatever we want, and you're keeping your hair. So I was like, okay, here we go.
A lot of the other guys grew out their hair too. Dreadlocks, braids, frosted tips, beards, goatees. The 2004 Red Sox had it all. And to complete the look, they swapped out their cars for something a little bit more rock and roll.
Oh shoot, our spring training that year, a bunch of us bought motorcycles.
Not just any motorcycles, custom-made ones. Souped-up crotch rockets.
All Harley parts and just very cool-looking bikes. A lot of loud noise when we came rumbling through the town of Boston.
Hopes were high going into the opening day of the 2004 season.
The Red Sox are again filled with high hopes and a lot of expectations for this season.
But the Red Sox lost to the Baltimore Orioles. They won their next two, and then they lost. Again.
They went like 4 months playing like win one, lose one. They had a long stretch of mediocrity given how good they were.
Watching the Sox in the early part of the 2004 season, it was clear they had all the ammunition. They just needed a spark. Something to light the fuse. They got that one weekend in late July. The Red Sox were playing the Yankees. Again, those guys. At the time, the Yankees' star player was Alex Rodriguez, or as most people know him, A-Rod. or as I know him, J-Lo's other ex. It was fair to say that Red Sox fans despised A-Rod. He represented everything about the Yankees they hated. He appeared smug, arrogant, and aloof.
He was just the poser and the guy that everybody hates and easy to mock.
On Saturday, July 24th, 2004, the Red Sox played A-Rod and the New York Yankees. Dan Shaughnessy was there.
It was a Saturday game. The Democratic National Convention was starting on Monday, where John Kerry would be nominated for president.
I'm John Kerry, and I'm reporting for duty.
He's a local guy, so it was a big deal. So it was a big weekend, and a lot of all kinds of national press were here. The Saturday was a rainy day, and they weren't going to play, and then they did play. A-Rod was batting against Bronson Arroyo, and they knew each other from high school. They were two Florida kids. Anyway,
Bronson Arroyo was a younger guy on the roster, the fifth pitcher in the Sox rotation. He's slender, young-looking, and here he was, up against Alex Rodriguez. It's a David against Goliath scenario. Boy versus baseball giant.
Alex Rodriguez is drilled, and he says something to Bronson.
Bronson's first pitch zooms past A-Rod and into catcher Jason Varitek's mitt. But his second, he drills it straight at A-Rod, and it slaps him on the back. A deliberate hit. And a petulant act, as A-Rod saw it.
Here we go.
So A-Rod is mad, and he starts mouthing off to Arroyo, then back to Varitek. Now, Jason Varitek is the Red Sox captain, and the kind of man who is not to be messed with.
Varitek and A-Rod going at it.
If you watch the footage back, it doesn't take a skilled lip reader to figure out what's being said. Mostly four-letter words, starting with F. A-Rod tells Varitek, F you. Varitek says to A-Rod, no, F you. They keep mouthing off. And then they get right up in each other's faces.
And then all hell broke loose.
Photographer Stan Grossfeld was there that day, and he recalls lining up his camera to capture this mayhem. In his frame, he sees Varitek and A-Rod squaring up, and down the viewfinder he watches as Varitek shoves his mitt into A-Rod's face. Stan lined up the shot and pressed down on the shutter. And for a moment, time stopped.
The crazy thing about photography is, at least in those days before electronic cameras, the mirror goes up and down. So at the moment of exposure, so you don't really see the moment. But if you see him about to push the glove in his face, and then the next frame that you see is the glove is off his face, you sort of assume that you got the glove sandwich. And from there on, you got about 2 seconds before you've got about 20 Yankee asses in your frame charging the scene.
Now another fight off to the side. Millar is in it. Nixon is in it.
It just becomes a Donnybrook, and your heart just starts racing, and the fans are going crazy. It's sweaty. It's exciting. It's mayhem.
When the dust settled, Stan looked back through all the pictures he got that day, and he realized he had captured the exact moment when Varitek shoved his mitt into A-Rod's face. The glove sandwich was immortalized.
The visual of the Red Sox catcher stuffing his mitt into A-Rod's face is forever. It's timeless, and it adorns most bar rooms and man caves in New England for the next 20 years. So yes, and we have one here at the house.
Why do you think that image has endured?
This is our producer, Matt Nelson, talking to Stan.
It represents the lowly, tortured Red Sox nation, tortured for 86 years, rising above, planting the flag down and saying, F you to New York. And this is our day where we're going to shine. And for everyone who's been downtrodden in their life, this is your moment of glory.
The Red Sox won that game against the Yankees. And after that, they went on a tear, winning game after game.
It was the moment in our season I felt that we needed. And I remember saying we went 2-0. We won the fight and we won the game. It was like the turning point, I feel, in the season. You know, it was like yeah, now it's time to go.
The Red Sox ended the 2004 season in second place in their division, behind the Yankees. In the first round of the playoffs, they swept the Anaheim Angels. Now they were really cooking. And like a lot of great teams, the Red Sox picked up a nickname that set them apart from all of the other ball clubs. But their nickname wasn't flashy like the Showtime Lakers. It wasn't inspirational like the Miracle Mets, or epic like the Dream Team. Because of antics like the brawl, the press had started calling the Sox the Idiots. Here's Matt talking to Johnny Damon and Kevin Millar.
Where did that name come from?
Well, it mostly came from Kevin Millar. Kevin Millar, he talks a lot.
We did an interview. It was like kind of like we're just a bunch of idiots. You know, I don't know why, but we're like a bunch of idiots. So when you say that, it becomes printed.
All of a sudden, it's you're seeing signs from people saying that I'm in love with an idiot and all that stuff.
So that's what everyone, the fans, press, other baseball players, called them. The Idiots. Well, everyone except manager Terry Francona.
I never referred to them as that. I know, they did it kind of endearingly. I just was never comfortable calling them that because, again, they're my responsibility. And I just, you don't ever want to be disrespectful. And I certainly didn't view them that way. I just thought they were a lot of characters, man, a lot of them. But when the game started, they knew what they were supposed to do. And I appreciated that.
Soon, Terry and his team would face their biggest test, the ultimate challenge. If the Red Sox wanted to break the curse of the Bambino and win the World Series, they'd have to overcome their bitter rivals, the New York Yankees. But this time, in the playoffs, with everything on the line. That's next time on The Curse Breakers.
These guys lose again tonight. They will go down as the biggest pack of frauds we've ever had here.
Being called a fraud, I mean, that's jail time in the real world.
All of a sudden it was like, yeah, bro, that's it. We're not going. And then it was like, don't let us win tonight.
Woke up the team, got us going.
This was the moment.
And now, your Boston Globe podcast team. Your host is me, Jasmine Aguilera, tonight's starting pitcher. This episode was written and produced by Matthew Nelson. The Globe's batting order. This podcast is produced by Steph Brown, Matthew Nelson, and Jasmine Aguilera. Our audio intern is Mara Melitz. In the dugout, our editor and executive producer is Kristen Nelson. Senior Assistant Sports Editor Katie McInerney saw this project through and was a clutch hitter. And behind the plate, our fact checker is Maddie Mahoney. Our theme music is composed by Sam Bagola, mixing and sound design by Uzair Ahmed. Special thanks to Boston Globe sports editor Matt Pepin and deputy sports editor Scott Thurston, and to Boston Globe editor Nancy Barnes.
And lastly, a huge thank you to all the Sox fans who shared their stories with us: Cheryl Cosmo, Anna Kuzmer, Mike Jem, Benjamin Cherry, Lucas Restivo, Rob Green, and Jamie Andrews. And just a quick note, the Boston Globe's owner, John Henry, also owns the Red Sox. This was an independent Globe production.